Thank you, Moeed. Let's, without further ado, kick this off. Let's start by basically focusing on what exactly do we mean by national security. I mean, you did a national security strategy paper, the first of its kind in 75 years. So let's just start with a basic explanation of what the exercise was about.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. And first of all, I'm really sorry. I apologize. The sad part is that I don't think the traffic blockade had anything to do with the situation in Punjab. That's just who we are. So I apologize. But nothing I could do about it. Look, I mean, I think this debate about national security and why a country like Pakistan needs a national security policy and why we decided to make it public, there's been a lot of conversation on this. But fundamentally, to my mind, there is only one universal definition of national security. And that is that if your average citizen, and by average citizen I mean the more disempowered one, does not feel physically, economically and psychologically secure, you can have every other kind of security, but you won't have a strong nation. I think probably the best example is the Soviet Union, right? I mean, the second strongest military in the world, a military industrial complex, very, very poor economy in terms of ability to manufacture, in terms of export, lived off natural resources, and the result is in front of us. So if we can't think of security as human, it doesn't really make sense to think about it. The reason we've talked so much about economic security in the past year and a half, is that Pakistan simply doesn't have the requisite resources to spend on human welfare as well as its military. We are under-resourced on the traditional security side. We are grossly under-resourced on the human security side. So unless you can have a larger economic resource pie, this is all a conversation, right? I mean, you have 100 rupees in the kitty, you need 500. You will always keep fighting over this. So one goal is to distribute better, but the other real goal is to take your pie to 500 so that you have enough resources. That's basically, in a nutshell, the idea.
So one of the issues, and it's been an old debate here, kind of in the backdrop of guns versus butter, that you have a certain geopolitical situation. You have, for better or worse, you stuck in that. At the same time, you have also not particularly focused on export-oriented economy or manufacturing. And some of the critics say that just because you're spending on traditional security in and of itself never meant that you could not or you should not have tried to increase the size of the economic pie. And the result being that now you have scarcity as far as traditional security is concerned, and you have scarce economic resource base also.
Again, hindsight is 20/20. So you start putting yourself in the shoes of people who were making those decisions. Maybe those were the only decisions available at that time. Maybe they thought those were the best decisions. The challenge is, and I think to me in life, but frankly for states, the challenge is at what point do you realize the need to course correct versus perpetuating something that may not have worked as well as it should have, right? Even now, people say it's too late. It's not too late at all. I mean, 75 years is a very short period of time for countries. So I think this NSP shows you that there's a codified intent to move in a different direction. Of course, now you've got to do a lot to change what we were doing. To me, Ejaz, frankly, the geopolitical environment is what you get. You don't create it, right? I mean, if you were to ask me today what's the one thing I would want to do as a policymaker before I can start fixing things, it is that I would pick up Pakistan and take it to another region for about 30 years and we'll be fine. I mean, look at where we are. You've got India to the east. You've got two globally isolated countries to the west. You've got a partner to the north. Whenever you do something with that partner that's positive, some capitals in the world now raise their eyebrows, and vice versa, right? And you've got sea to the south. So it's a fairly difficult environment that we exist in. The problem with our economic model, as far as I'm concerned, our economists, of course, rightly open this up, unpack it, look at various nuances, manufacturing, industry, services, all of that, taxation. Bottom line is very simple. We used our relevance in the security realm to create an economic model of growth. So anytime we were relevant to the West and there was a crisis on our border, we got tremendous amounts of inflows of foreign capital. As soon as that crisis ended, you were barren again. You didn't use those periods to create a sustainable economic model, because the economic modeling, oddly enough, was done, seems to me, under the presumption that that inflow will continue forever, while your geopolitical strategy was to end those wars. So you wanted the crisis to end. After the crisis, you didn't know how the money would keep flowing. And that's exactly the situation we find ourselves in today. What we are trying to talk about in sort of the NSP and this whole idea of geoeconomics is to invert the model. Use your location as an economic hub and develop an economic model based on your economic strength rather than only the security. Nothing wrong with using your relevance in the security world to get benefits economically. That's not the problem. The problem is you can't then create a model which says, I don't need to take any pain because I will just keep getting handouts from the rest of the world. And when those handouts dry up, you don't want to make the reforms that are needed to sustain yourself. That's fundamentally the cycle of 70 years that Pakistan has gone through.
So every time you got the fiscal space, you did not utilize it.
You didn't need to because you thought they were handouts. It's easy come, easy go. I keep telling my children all the time, they don't turn off the electricity because they don't have to pay for it. And that's what my parents told me. Now it pinches me. At that time, I didn't care. That's how we've operated as a country, sadly.
Okay, so let's talk about this term geoeconomics. Now, the term originally as coined by Lutwak meant something different. That's one point. The other thing is that we are now entering a world where the neoliberal globalization model is giving way to the emergence of blocs that are, for the most part, adversarial, where the allies are going to trade, but also use the economic levers as a coercive apparatus to sanction the adversaries. I don't have to give examples there in front of everyone. So we are getting into, at this particular time, we're getting into a very difficult situation in terms of finding partners, in terms of trading and the rest of it. So what is the way forward?
Yeah, they came. When you're in a difficult situation, you'll always have these conversations of saying, even the right thing doesn't seem to be delivering the results that we are looking for. But obviously, if you're a patient who's not doing well and has multiple ailments, talking to that patient about running a marathon is a bit of a waste of time, right? So there are going to be small steps and you've got to move in that direction. But if the patient essentially convinces him or herself that I am never going to get out of this bed, then you're never going to go where you need to go. So those small steps have to be towards a goal, and the goal is for Pakistan to actually create a self-sustaining economic model where we are talking about our region and our location as the connectivity hub. So we benefit from trade, transit and production in that sense. We move away from a model where we are looking for assistance from the world to development partnerships. Now that's going to be slow because we've deindustrialized over time. We don't have those ready options. So you start with sectors where you may have a competitive advantage. IT is one of them. Agriculture is, waiting to happen, but we haven't managed to do it. Then your developed sectors, the big exporters, I think need to figure out how to raise that bar in terms of the export levels. Your other foreign exchange earning sources, your remittances. 80% of Pakistanis abroad are essentially unskilled and in the Gulf for the most part. Why aren't we switching to a model of semi-skilled and skilled labor, going to aging economies like Germany, Japan, Malaysia has a lot of openings for Pakistanis, etc. Those are the shifts that we have to make now. We can't be talking about, I keep hearing numbers of 10 billion IT exports in 2 years. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But if you start building those blocks, and my experience in government Ejaz is that, I think most governments are like that, but definitely Pakistan, you can't do too many things well at the same time. We don't have that kind of capacity. So you pick your priorities. You pick the export sectors, you pick the sectors where you want to send, or countries where you want to send your labor, and then you work around that to increase your foreign exchange earnings. Similarly, at the same time, where is it that you can cut costs, right? Personally, import substitution I don't think has worked anywhere in the world. At least not in tandem, not without being in tandem with export growth. But how about changing the societal structures of the elite? The 30 minutes that I was standing on the road, if I tell you who was passing, frankly, even if somebody had free time, they won't go and attack that gentleman. But he thinks he's important, right? So the point is, how about cutting on the fat that exists because of our monopoly of power, our elite structures and the way we operate? Then gradually you can find other things. Some imports can be cut, there are other areas where you can do it. Finally, privatization. This conversation, I don't know how many governments have had this conversation. Not a single sort of note that I've ever seen in the public sector or in the policy world that says we shouldn't privatize. And yet, here we are. We are sitting, waiting and waiting. So, these are things that are doable. If you do this, your balance sheet will start improving within 2 or 3 years. This is not 30 years down the line. Then you find that space, right? You've got to go through some surgery, then physiotherapy, then walk. And that, it's no rocket science. It's doable. We are not a country whose institutions have failed. And the example I always give people is, you take any institution in the public sector, put a good individual to run it, you'll start seeing performance. You take somebody mediocre, somebody not as relevant, it'll die. That means that the institutional capacity to take off is there. You're simply not managing it in the way that you should manage it. I'm sorry, this is going to be a very provocative comment, but I say this as all of us sitting here as a Pakistani. We have to stop looking at our country as a rented house. I remember in college, you used to have 4 or 5 of you who came together to rent a house because you couldn't afford the whole place. Everybody got a room. You didn't care whether the paint was okay, whether you broke a chair, whether the carpet was filthy or not. And then, for the most part, you would always have this debate, the last rent. Who's going to pay it? Are you going to pay it? Are you not going to pay it? Are you going to run away? Right? Typical sort of college mentality. You didn't care about the house. And the person who rented the house out also had built in a premium in that they knew they would have to get it painted after you left. Is this how we have to deal with our country? Everybody seems to be taking the country for a ride, making the quick buck they can. You go out, everybody sitting here is a part of the civilized society. Go out right now and see how many have littered inside the basket outside and how many have thrown it next to the basket. This is for the society to decide. If this is rented property that we want to run to the ground, we're doing a fairly good job. I want to know what's going to happen to the 99% of Pakistanis who don't have a foreign passport, who cannot leave this country, who are here to live and die. And if we, the elite, and people like me who wear a tie and go to government and think we are doing a wonderful job, if we are failing, let them lead this country then. I have no right to do that.
That was one of the reasons I decided not to wear a tie. But here's the thing. Well, privatization, obviously, I have my own view on that. It requires an entire separate session. I don't particularly think that private entities, unless they meet certain preconditions, can be automatically more efficient than the state-owned enterprises, but that's a separate debate. The question really is, and I'm going to come to...
In Pakistan's case, you will save X trillion rupees every year just by privatizing. Let's talk about efficiency later.
That's right. I mean, that's one of the arguments that's given, but But I think we also need to see what is it that we want to privatize. Anyway, so I'll get to connectivity also, because there is a huge problem of geopolitics there. But let's get to this idea of internal restructuring, whether in terms of better civic sense, whether in terms of how to restructure the elite or how to make them rethink that this is not a rented house. How will that happen? I mean, in the sense that the 1% that Miftah talks about, remember yesterday when you and Miftah were on my program, we talked about it again. This rented house or this rentier attitude is working perfectly fine for them. So why would they break the template? I mean, who is it that's actually going to, even if incrementally, begin to think about changing things? And allied to that is the issue of another debate, which is that should we have an industrial policy or a policy, for want of a better word, which actually says, okay, X, Y, Z sectors are where we want to actually, the government must begin to facilitate. You know that there are economists that say that should be the case. There are others who say, no, the government has no business doing that. We have the example of South Korea. We also have the example of China where that happened. Which side or which school would you follow in terms of this argument that, you know, if we want to begin to develop economically, that we need to begin to identify sectors and the government then has to facilitate those sectors?
So, first of all, I am no longer, I used to be in my academic life, and maybe I'll go back to that, but I'm no longer a fan when I talk of policy of talking of big things. I want an industrial policy. I want to talk about whether I can do these big things in one go. I don't have that capacity. I'm still sort of coming out of a phase where I need physiotherapy and I'll start taking baby steps, right? So whether you have that policy or not, the question I would ask first is, have you changed your mindset, which is required to make that policy a success, right? You can't ask me to create a national security policy built around connectivity and want to close every single border forever. So I start from a different point, which is who is going to manage and govern, yeah? So in terms of the management, if we are not going to bring in domain knowledge into our civil service structure, if we are not going to have people who understand that their principal job is facilitation, not regulation, you can create whatever policy, whatever private sector is simply not going to go anywhere. Yeah? If you're going to keep thinking of Pakistan's governance as a top-down centralized model, whether it's the federal government or the provincial government, you won't be able to make that change. Once you strengthen local governments, once you have a bureaucratic structure which is a combination of experts who know what that particular sector needs and implementers that our bureaucrats are very good at, the implementation part, with a mindset of facilitating private sector to figure out where they can or cannot invest, that's when change is going to come. Otherwise, with a regulatory mindset, you can create as many policies as you want and as many ministries as you want. You know, in my personal view, the federal government can be run with 10 ministries, full stop. You don't need the number that we have now. But if the goal is to have maximum number of ministries because you want to oblige maximum number of people who are now in government, then why do we even bother to see whether we can improve or not? So those are things that are doable. You know, I'm not talking of changing the elite structure. Miftah's point is absolutely valid. We know that. I'm just don't know whether you can tackle the most difficult problem, which is changing the incentive structures of the elite who are benefiting from this, you know, as much as they can. I don't think that's realistic before you can build these blocks on which better governance is going to stand.
Okay, so that gets us, in a way, to politics. If you have coalition governments, you have to oblige your partners. And every party in a coalition government has its own vested interests, parochial interests. If a party is, ensconced in Sindh or Balochistan or KPK, they want certain things done. And so there is a trade-off. Excuse me. And that trade-off is that, you make these political compromises, you aggregate often conflicting and contradictory interests. And this is something, in fact, the former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been saying. I mean, that unless you have a mandate where you want to do certain things, in fact, he's on record as saying that, if I get a split mandate, I won't even form the government. I don't know whether, he would actually do that or not, but at least he's on the record saying that. That has its own downside, in terms of getting strongmen and in terms of getting parties. We're witnessing that in India, we've witnessed that elsewhere in the world. So there's a paradox there also. But how do you reduce the number of ministries when you have to oblige people? I mean, it's a political cost. So I take your point, but there are real problems in implementing an agenda, even if incrementally and gradually, to move in the right direction.
You're absolutely right. But the point is, if you're asking me for a solution, which is frankly our national problem, if you're asking me for a solution which is painless, it's death, if you're lucky, right? So when you have, again, back to the sort of medical, I belong to a medical family, so that's all I can think about all the time, but you think of that patient. At some point, the doctor says X medicine or medication is going to solve your problem. But I can't give you this medication because you have 5 other ailments, right? Now, if the patient says, I want to get out of all 6 without pain, it's not going to happen, right? So there are costs. But let me ask you one very simple question. If there is a model in which you are unwilling to absorb that cost, and that decision, day after day, year after year, government after government, is taking you from weakness to more weakness, then clearly that cost has to be taken for you to change something. Right? Now, if you say there are real costs and this is not possible, well, if it's not possible, then let me ask you another question. How long has an average Pakistani Prime Minister lasted? If those costs were so worth absorbing, I would think as a rational actor, every individual was thinking that I want to complete my term and get another term and another term. That's what a political leader would think, right? Rationally speaking. Clearly, we've way off that benchmark. So if your goal is longevity in power, your model is not working. If your goal is getting Pakistan to the next level, your model is not working. If your goal is that you're going to oblige people and they will not stab you in the back again, I don't know of any coalition government in Pakistan that's lasted that way, there's a fairly rational argument to be made here. Now, you can say that this is something that I cannot do. I could be whoever, right? Well, in that case, it's death.
But here's the thing, when we talk about cost, what we have seen so far is that whenever we have tried to restructure half-baked, or call it what you will, the cost is actually borne by the disadvantaged, not by those whose acts of omission and commission have brought the country to this pass. Do we have a model where those who have actually benefited will also end up bearing the cost?
Yeah, it comes in extreme cases. The starkest of examples. So, Afghanistan. I don't want to name any country as good, bad. That's not the point. I have seen, or anybody who's been to Kabul, more palaces and palatial homes in Kabul than in any part of the United States. Right? You just go and look around. It's all money that poured in because of the war, corruption, leakages. It's basically US taxpayers' dollar and Western taxpayers' dollars that went into that. The change came, the country changed. Some would say collapse, some would say change, whatever. Just go and find out what those billionaires are doing. Just find out. They're essentially stateless. Some don't know where to go. Some are on welfare. Some are in hiding. And some, even though are being sort of kept in other countries under guarantees of security, cannot see anybody, cannot go anywhere, and probably live with deep, deep guilt every single day. Right? So everybody hurts when your country hurts. Unless you think it's a rented room that can go to hell in a handbasket and won't bother you. You know, my worry for Pakistan, and I actually do worry about it, is that the disempowered and the elite all seem to have one fatalism deeply embedded in them, which is, ऐसे ही चलता रहेगा, अल्लाह खैर करेगा. ये अल्लाह ताला ने खैर की हुई है, अभी तक हमने तो कोई कसर ही नहीं छोड़ी. So let's try and do a little bit ourselves. I don't think we're anywhere near the point of no return, but there are specific things that one just needs a list and you start doing as any government on day one, and in 5 years you'll see a difference. But if you don't do those things and you keep debating it's very difficult, there's the cost attached to that, etc., then obviously, I mean, you know, there is nothing else you can do.
So that's a great disruption. By the way, lots of the post 9/11 Afghan elite also have palatial residences in Maryland and Virginia and the rest.
Wait. Let me ask you this. I can even name people, right? They were counterparts and colleagues. Can they enter a single US think tank? Are they invited to go and speak anywhere about their experience? Are they somebody who can stand on the street and say, I'm Afghan today? No.
That's right. But they made a lot of money. Anyway, I'm gonna open the floor for questions. Yeah, you were the first one. Anyone who asks, please ask a question. Identify yourself. Give your name.
में 2019 का जो आर्टिकल 370 और 35A की एब्रोगेशन हुई है, उससे पहले भी उन्होंने कहा था कि हिंदुस्तान एक बड़ा ब्रेक थ्रू करने जा रहा है. तो आप क्या समझते हैं कि क्या पाकिस्तान की मिलिट्री इस्टेब्लिशमेंट ये मामला हिंदुस्तान के साथ कश्मीर का सेटल कर चुकी है कि वो वाला हिस्सा आप रख लें और ये वाला हिस्सा हम रख लें, जैसा कि हम देखते हैं कि फ़रूक नसीम साहब गिलगित बल्तिस्तान के हवाले से भी एक अमेंडमेंट पास करने की कोशिश करते हैं. दूसरा सवाल मेरा ये है कि चूँकि आपने बस लास्ट दूसरा सवाल ये है कि जिस तरह आपने बैंकरप्सी की बात की, पाकिस्तान डिफ़ॉल्ट होने की तरफ जा रहा है, इस तरह तो श्रीलंका ने अभी ये ऐलान किया कि वो अपनी फ़ौजें कम करने जा रहे हैं 50% तक. तो क्या पाकिस्तान के अंदर मिलिट्री की जो इतनी बड़ी है हमारी मिलिट्री, उसके अंदर भी कोई कट ऑफ लगने जाएगा? ये सारा जो परेशानी है ये सिर्फ आवाम को देखनी पड़ेगी. थैंक यू.
जी बोले नाश्ता किया हुआ आपने?
Assalamu alaikum sir, I am Ejaz Ali, student of international relations, and I just want to know from you, like in the document national security policy, you specifically portrayed that our national security policy revolves around unity is our diversity, the one thing. And the second thing you specially mentioned for the students and for the knowledge seeker, it's about knowledge seeking. So what I am worried about, like presently at the moment, there are no specific education regarding international relation, and particularly about for the above 90% youth who belong to the middle class and lower middle class. So what will you suggest or how you will take up these things? Because if we don't have a quality education, how these things will go on? Thank you.
Kiran, you want? Kiran?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम किरण है एंड आई एम जर्नलिस्ट. मोहित साहब, मेरा आपसे एक सवाल है कि आपने जब नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी बनाई थी तो देयर वाज अ डायलॉग गोइंग ऑन इन इस्लामाबाद वेयर लॉट्स ऑफ पीपल केम आउटसाइड ऑफ द कंट्री एंड जनरल बाजवा आल्सो स्पोक एट द इवेंट. तो उसके बाद एक इंडियन जर्नलिस्ट जो आए हुए थे, प्रवीण स्वाने, ही रोट अ न्यूज़ के जनरल बाजवा ने मुझे कहा है कि वो 7 लाख से फ़ौज को जो है वो कम करके 5 लाख पे लेके जा रहे हैं, जिसमें जो बाकी 2 लाख पे पैसे लग रहे थे वो आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस और आईटी में जो है वो हम करेंगे. सो इज़ दैट प्लान रियली गोइंग ऑन? एंड द सेकंड क्वेश्चन इज़ कि आफ्टर द काबुल गवर्नमेंट चेंज, लाइक यू सेड, कि कोई फॉल उसको कहते हैं, गवर्नमेंट कहता है, वी आर हैविंग अ मेजर सिक्योरिटी इशू ऑन आर बॉर्डर्स विद अफगानिस्तान एंड नाउ अब तो वो पंजाब तक और इस्लामाबाद तक चीज़ आ गई है. सो हाउ डू यू थिंक कि अभी इस करंट सिनेरियो को देखते हुए आपकी ऑलरेडी बनाई गई नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी में किस किस्म के चेंजेस आने चाहिए एट द मोमेंट? थैंक यू.
Okay, in this round, the final question जी इधर ले जाइए.
हेलो मोईद, मेरा नाम दीप है. सवाल में थोड़ी सी मुझे डिसअपॉइंटमेंट हुई कि आपने इतनी लंबी बात की, ज़्यादा फोकस पॉलिटिक्स और उस पर रहा. नेशनल सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसी जो है हमारे मुल्क का बजट का बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा फ़ौज की तरफ जा रहा है. तो आई वाज एक्सपेक्टिंग कि आप इसके ऊपर, ये सवाल जवाब से पहले आप अपनी बात में इसका जिक्र करते कि ये जो एक इदारा है जो खा गया है पूरे मुल्क को, इसके ऊपर भी कोई बात करें.
सर इजाज़त है?
मैं अभी पहले ये जवाब दे दूं, भूल जाऊंगा फिर उसके बाद. अभी भी भूल गया हूँ एक्चुअली. अच्छा, हामिद मीर साहब ने क्या कहा ये हामिद मीर साहब ही बता सकते हैं, मैं इतना रिसोर्सफुल नहीं हूँ. बट एज फार एज आई नो एंड आई एम 100% confident of this, there is no such decision at all, जो आप कश्मीर के हवाले से बात कर रहे हैं. जहाँ तक ये 2-3 सवाल हैं, आई थिंक मिलिट्री का आपने भी पूछा है और आप किरण परवीन स्वानी से पूछें कि उसने क्यों लिखा है. वुडंट नो दैट एनीथिंग अबाउट दैट कॉन्वर्सेशन. बट देखें, I want to sort of make a deeper point before I answer this question. As a nation, we are very rapidly losing the ability to analyze and debate issues objectively. जब हम पढ़ाते हैं ना स्टूडेंट्स को political science, so one of my first messages to them is, अगर आपने अपने पेपर की conclusion अपनी introduction से पहले लिख ली है तो वो पेपर लिखने की ज़रूरत नहीं. Sorry, there are people here who don't understand Urdu. So if you've written the conclusion of your paper before your introduction, you've already biased your analysis, no point going through that exercise. So if you think that the problem is the military is too large, every conclusion you draw will be that the military is too large. The decision on whether the military should be smaller, larger, whatever, is based on the environment you operate in and the threats you face. If there's a consensus on the fact that it should be even larger, I would support that. If there's a consensus on the fact that it should be smaller, I'd support that. But the way to come at this problem is not, I don't like the military, I want the military to be smaller. I don't like politicians, I want a coup. This is not how you can do analysis, right? So Pakistan is very peculiar environment in which we have to operate. Of course, we need to recalibrate all the time and see what is best for us. Right? And where do we want to go and what space we need to capture for ourselves. But I don't accept this analytical approach which I find in Pakistan now again and again. Politically जब बात होती है, starting point ये जी मुझे ये बंदा पसंद है, आपको ये पसंद है, आप लड़ाई कर लें. Nobody is bothered to talk about the issues at hand. Right? So that's, I think, where we need to go, especially the youngsters sitting in this room. You know, if you are going to become part of this divisive debate in the country, you don't need any international relations program, my friend. All you need to do is learn how the World Wrestling Federation works, and we'll do that. And we're doing pretty well at that. That's not what we should be doing as a country. Let's analyze and look what part of something or somebody you don't like may still be good and what may be bad, and then you find that space. मेरे नज़दीक इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस, You know, yes, all education needs to improve. The real education that I think we need to now focus on as a mission in Pakistan is civics. Unless you can first explain to Pakistan and to me what citizenry is, there is no real point talking about what the state is. Because let me ask you this question. All of you, all of us are all the time upset at our leaders. But who elects them? We can debate, oh, it's fair, it's not fair and whatever, but you know who you voted for. And you can find a million people here who would say, "Kya banda corrupt hai, lekin yaar chalo mera kaam to ho jaye." Educated or uneducated. So let's first start teaching civic sense and citizenry. Why do you litter on the street? I don't know. Right? Why is it that when we turn the tap of water on to wash a car, the entire tanky can end but no problem, because water is not priced in this country? Right? Water is not priced in many countries in the world, but I've never seen this kind of attitude. You know, somebody, a friend of mine was over from abroad the other day. It's Pakistani, but he hasn't been here for a while. And he said, "Yaar, I can't understand how we use petrol in this country." So I asked him why. He said, "Main aaya hu, I'm at home. One of my kids said, I want ice cream. So the Nana Nani said, send the car, get ice cream. The guy comes back, the other one says, but I wanted French fries. The car goes again to get French fries. If this was in America, you would either take a bus or walk and get what you need, because you couldn't afford those two trips. Right? For a country that has no oil, this is the kind of attitude we have. So this is a problem of citizenry. No state, no politician, no army has told us to use more petrol than we need. Right? That, I think, is absolutely crucial. In terms of the unity and diversity का मुझे सवाल भूल गया क्या था? Who asked? ये IR वाला जो आपने पूछा था. अच्छा, वो तो हो गया. That's okay.
And that is it diversity actually allowed to us by state, actually, because we are very diverse nation, but we still not fully celebrated it.
So I mean, that's what we have to do. I mean, that's exactly what the policy talked about, to do more of that. And finally, there was this point about the TTP. Look, I mean, the national security policy is not a strategy. It's not a document that's going to deliver in 1 day or 2 days. It's a long-term policy, in that you are going to have good and bad times. So you may have a problem in connecting on your western border now, but you've got to find whatever space you can to open up there. What needs to change is a decision that the people who are deciding today need to make. Right? I mean, it's really for them to decide. I'm not privy to the inside sort of information of what's happening. So based on that, they should look at that. The only thing I'd say is, we need to move away from this mindset that a document is a government's document. It's the state of Pakistan's document, no matter which government. Whatever is good in that for the country needs to be followed, and whatever you think is not, you can change it.
Okay, I just want to make one point, because something that Moeed said is very close to my heart, which, with reference to education. What exactly is education? I mean, we send our kids to schools. Are they developing critical thinking? I mean, because we talk about analysis, and as Moeed said, if we have written down the conclusion even before the introduction, there's no point going through that. And critical thinking is essentially about connecting dots. वो गालिब ने कहा था ना कि कतरे में दजला दिखाई ना दे और जुज़्व में कुल, खेल लड़कों का हुआ दीदा ए बीना ना हुआ. So the point really is whether we have actually managed that, and the answer is no. And secondly, when, you know, I keep hearing about cutting down the numbers in the army, without people realizing that if and when you do that, you will be moving from a relatively less costly, labor-intensive model to a far costlier, tech-intensive model. So while you'll bring the numbers down, your cost will actually go up. Anyway, second round of questions, we left with just 10 minutes or so. आपने तो पहले ही पकड़ लिया माइक. आप शुरू हो जाए. एक सेकंड.
सुलेमान शाह, पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी का स्टूडेंट हूँ और बेसिकली बलूचिस्तान से ताल्लुक़ रखता हूँ. सर, यहाँ पे हम लोगों ने बहुत बात की ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट्स की. सर मेरी नज़र में पाकिस्तान जो आजकल फेस करे वो नॉन ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट्स ज़्यादा है, और यहाँ पे सर जब हम लोग गवर्नमेंट से बाहर होते हैं तो हम लोग ज़्यादा क्रिटिकल होते हैं और आउटस्पोकन होते हैं, वाइल इन गवर्नमेंट हम लोग उस तरह की नहीं बात करते हैं जिस तरह करनी चाहिए। सर पाकिस्तान में नॉन ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट्स जैसे मास माइग्रेशन, जो ट्रांसनेशनल क्राइम्स की या फूड सिक्योरिटी की या इस तरह की जो टेररिज्म की अभी जुनूबी वे बलूचिस्तान और केपी में, सर जब आप गवर्नमेंट में थे आपने इसके लिए क्या किया और आप लोगों ने कौन सी पॉलिसीज़ डिज़ाइन की इन ऑर्डर टू काउंटर ऑल दीज नॉन ट्रेडिशनल सिक्योरिटी थ्रेट्स?
हाँ जी, आप इनको दे दें ये सब। आई कांट एकोमोडेट एवरीवन, बट आपने काफ़ी देर से हाथ खड़ा किया हुआ था।
सर कैन आई आस्क क्वेश्चन?
सलाम सर, मैं जियो न्यूज़ में सीनियर रिपोर्टर हूँ, इरफान ज़ीर मेरा नाम है। मैं आपको प्रेस क्लब में भी सुन चुका हूँ, अब बड़े मुहब्बे वतन हैं। आपने जितनी भी बातें की हैं उसमें मेरा ख्याल है कोई हल तजवीज़ नहीं किया, और फ़ौज को जो कट साइज़ करने के हवाले से जो मैंने समझा है, आपने कहा कि माहौल और कशीदगी हमें इस कट करने की इजाज़त नहीं देती। और दूसरा ये बताएं कि इमरान खान की वो थिन लाइन क्या थी, वो रेड लाइन क्या थी जो आसिफ बाजवा के साथ उनके साथ इतनी बिगड़ी, और आप जैसे नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एडवाइज़र भी उनको कोई एडवाइस नहीं दे सके?
I want to get a question from, आप जी आप खड़े, the one wearing a pink dupatta. Is that pink or orange? I can't see it properly.
My question is to Sir Moeed. Sir, while defining the national security in general terms, you said that if an average citizen doesn't feel secure economically, physically, and psychologically. So I want to ask the question that where does this national security definition, why doesn't this definition works in Balochistan, where you subject an innocent individual to definite threats of life and all those tortures when it comes to Balochistan? And while talking about general policy while talking about an economic policy with respect to geography, you totally gave up an impractical and fantasy based idea that you would take Pakistan to another region for 30 years and Pakistan will improve. So why didn't you put forth a rather practical thing, like you have Balochistan where you have resources, you have Punjab where you have agriculture? Why don't you go with the practical aspect of our country?
Final question. I want to take it from a female student here. Any female student who wants to ask a question?
Assalamu alaikum ji.
You are not a female by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sure you have a question.
Assalamu alaikum ji. My name is Tareen Haider. I think earlier, Moeed, you spoke about the shift in the thinking that we need to drive from moving from a taking handouts model to becoming self-sustaining, right? And you talked about citizenry in the last couple of minutes as well. So my question is, what kind of programs or initiatives do we need to run to make sure that this mindset shift actually occurs? Because I think without that, at an individualized level, it would be very difficult to drive the quantum of change that we need.
Okay, so all actually very interesting and challenging questions, so thanks for that. पहली बात, हमने यहाँ traditional security की तो कोई ज़्यादा बात की नहीं, so I'm not sure what you're referring to. In terms of non-traditional security, the entire national security policy, the whole idea of that policy, every single thing that policy says is that we have to focus much more on non-traditional security, right? So, सारा concept ही है. And I think you can actually say, and government comes with a lot of constraints, and you're supposed to be careful because you're an official and you can't say everything that I can say sitting here. That's the nature of the business. But frankly, in terms of Balochistan, the amount of focus that I saw in the public sector was more than any other province. The results are not there, there's no question about that, and that I think will take time. But for instance, the previous government, the South Balochistan package, the North Balochistan package, all of those things were thought through on what would actually bring development and change or move the needle in terms of the perception and the reality on the ground, right? So it's not that decision makers are not thinking, but when problems are very complex, short-term results don't show up. But I think it's very unfair to say that the conversation is only traditional security, because that entire policy is non-traditional security. I mean, that's exactly what the entire focus was. आपका सवाल जो है जी मिलिट्री, मैंने ये नहीं कहा कि हो सकती है नहीं हो सकती है, मैं आपको सिर्फ ये कह रहा हूँ कि जो उसका तज्जिया करने का तरीका है वो ऑब्जेक्टिव होना चाहिए. पहले से फैसला ना कर लें कि मुझे करनी है या नहीं करनी और उसके बाद आप उसके जस्टिफिकेशन दे दें. दैट्स ऑल आई एम सेइंग. सो दिस एक्सरसाइज विल गो ऑन. आई मीन Ejaz हैज़ अ व्यू पॉइंट, समबडी एल्स कैन हैव अ व्यू पॉइंट, बट इट कांट बी जी मुझे बस ये चाहिए तो इसलिए यही सही फैसला है. दूसरा जो आपका सवाल है उसका ज़ाहिरी बात है मैं जवाब नहीं दूंगा, आपको भी पता है, लेकिन मैं आपको ये ज़रूर कहना चाहूँगा टू ऑल ऑफ यू, for the past, what, it's been now 10 months or so, I think, since the previous government left office, I think 95% of the debate of Pakistan is on this question. And everybody has passed judgment on what happened, why it happened, and how it happened. And 99.99% of the people who have passed judgment have no clue what happened. What I want to know is, why as a nation do we think we have the luxury of wasting time on something that is gossip for most people who are not where they could see what had happened, and not spending time on figuring out what to do with this country, how to resolve the problems, what policies to change, especially again for the youngsters. Why are you wasting time figuring out, मुझे उसने ये बताया मैंने ये, you will never find out. It's not your job to find out. Your job is to now drive this country in a direction where we are going to see real change. So any moment you waste on gossip, I think is a wasted opportunity for you. That's all I can say to that. आपका सवाल बलोचिस्तान, again, I think I'll say the same thing. देखिए, I'm not sure that that definition of security applies anywhere today. Right? So the problem is national. We have to move to that model more and more. Some places are more complicated than others within Pakistan, right? And the more complicated and the more urgent the need somewhere, the more focus there should be. There is no question about that, right? And Balochistan definitely for me falls in that category. We have a huge problem of a lack of distribution of resources in our regions which are not urban towns, not big urban towns. Southern Punjab is as deprived in terms of the indicators as the most underdeveloped parts of Balochistan, right? For me as a policymaker, I have to look at both. I have to look at these urgently more than I look at Lahore, Karachi and Islamabad. So I think that's a conversation that has to continue as policymakers. Taking Pakistan away was a metaphor, of course, I'm sure you realize that. The point I was making is that it's a very difficult region to exist. So what we've put in the policy is not implementable tomorrow. It will take a long time. And as far as sort of the practical steps, again, I would urge you to read the policy because all of that is talking about what Pakistan needs to do. Handouts versus assistance, and then there was a question about the way forward. I don't know. Frankly, I don't know the answer to that question or what will change that. All I know is that I've never understood how we can proudly walk around talking about having begged somebody for money and then declaring victory when we achieve that. I've never really understood this concept, right? If the job of a Pakistani decision maker, anybody, is to focus on every 31st of the month on where I'm going to get the next paycheck from, I think we should be very embarrassed about it. And I think the starting point is this embarrassment and being ashamed about it to then start changing and making sure that I won't have to do this ever again, right? I don't know how that mindset changes. Nobody likes to do that, right? I mean, nobody wants to go and beg. And yet, the difficult decisions we have to take to make that happen don't happen. Let me also though say here, we can blame the state as much as we want and whoever in the state. A state goes out to raise taxes. Any new sector it imposes taxes on, you have a strike and that's the end of the conversation. Now, I stand up and say how weak is this state that is now buckled under pressure again. But can I not ask the other question? Those 100 people who went on strike, are they not Pakistanis who have to play a role in making sure that this state survives? That's the civics question and the citizenry question. And if we are not going to do both, trust me, state with 1,000 people at one time is not going to be able to fix a country of 220 million. Finally, as far as the way forward, I'm sorry, I wish I had time, but if you want to go and look at, there was a conversation Ejaz and I had with Miftah Ismail yesterday or day before. That has, I've laid out literally 5 or 7 points which we need to do one by one to make the change that at least I have in mind.
Thank you so much. We have run out of time. Thank you to everyone for listening patiently. I wish we had started earlier, but there's,
I apologize again.
There's another session to be held here. Thank you so much.